Imagine finding out that, I don't know, the Dalai Lama kept this secret, like, frantic diary.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, and in it, he had to constantly just desperately convince himself not to punch his coworkers.
That is quite the image.
Right. It's that jarring disconnect, between a public image of just absolute serenity and then this private reality of intense psychological struggle. And that is essentially what historians found when they read the private journals of the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius.
It really is. It's a complete paradigm shift.
Because when we walk through a museum and we look at those pristine white marble busts of Roman emperors, there's this expectation of, well, cold, hard perfection. We tend to view these historical figures as binary, like you are either a flawless, unshakable god among men, or you aren't.
Right, and we crave that categorization, don't we? I mean, it's much more comfortable to put someone like Marcus Aurelius on a pedestal and just assume his philosophical greatness was this fixed, inherent state of being.
Right.
The marble implies permanence. It implies that the piece he wrote about was something he just effortlessly possessed.
But then, you step into his actual private world, and that marble just shatters. We are faced with a psychological landscape that is, well, it's incredibly messy, it's fraught with anxiety, and it is full of contradictions.
Which is exactly what makes him so fascinating.
Exactly. And that brings us to the mission of today's deep dive. We are investigating a central, very provocative question about one of history's most famous figures. Was Marcus Aurelius naturally a calm, unshakable Stoic? Or, and this is the big question, did he need Stoicism precisely because he wasn't?
So to get to the bottom of that, we are looking at two vastly different primary sources today.
Right.
We have his famous private diary, the Meditations, which most people are somewhat familiar with, but we are reading it against a much less famous, but I would argue more revealing source, which is a collection of his surviving personal letters to his rhetoric teacher and close friend, Fronto.
Okay, let's unpack this, because reading these sources side by side, it completely upends the traditional narrative. I mean, I went into this expecting Meditations to read like the serene reflections of a man who had totally conquered human emotion.
Sure, that's the common assumption.
But looking closer at the frantic repetition, it feels a lot more like finding the sticky notes of a severely stressed out CEO who has to constantly remind himself not to lash out at his employees.
Well, and the historical reality of his reign makes that stress entirely understandable.
Yeah.
We often think of the Pax Romana as this golden age of stability, right?
Yeah.
But Marcus ruled during a period of relentless compounding crises. I mean, he was dealing with the Antonine Plague, which was brought back from the east by his legions and was absolutely decimating the population.
Just wiping people out.
Exactly. And on top of that, you have massive floods destroying Rome's grain supply, which is bringing starvation to the capital.
And nonstop wars.
Yeah.
He spent years shivering in these military tents on the northern and eastern frontiers, fighting off constant incursions. I mean, at one point, the treasury was so depleted from famine relief and warfare that he had to drag the imperial jewels out of the palace and sell them in a public auction.
Right, just to keep the state functioning. It was desperate.
It's wild to think about.
The public saw a resolute, disciplined philosopher king, right? Just holding a crumbling empire together through sheer force of will. But the private texts reveal the staggering cost of that posture.
Yeah, the chronic physical and emotional exhaustion from that public role is exactly why we need to look at who he was when the imperial armor came off. The letters to Fronto, they give us the man behind the marble.
They really do.
And this man is, frankly, physically frail, deeply attached, and honestly, pretty cranky.
The contrast with the Stoic ideal is just stark. In these letters to Fronto, he is constantly lamenting his physical state. I mean, he writes about having chest colds, coughing up phlegm, sniveling.
The sniveling. The Emperor of Rome is sniveling.
Yes. And having to soothe his raw throat with honey water, which, by the way, he meticulously notes he spits out rather than swallowing.
He's literally complaining about sneezing. It's such a humanizing detail.
It is.
And his attachments are incredibly intense. He doesn't sound detached at all. He addresses Fronto with these effusive, affectionate terms. He's calling him his honey sweet, his darling, his delight.
And we also see these beautiful, utterly ordinary domestic scenes. He describes sitting on his bed, having a long, gossipy chat with his mother.
I love that part.
Right, that they talk about Fronto, and then they pivot to just doting on Marcus's little daughter, Gracia, whom he affectionately calls his Sparrowkin.
The Sparrowkin.
Yeah. This is a man who loves his family fiercely, and he is just paralyzed with worry when his children fall ill.
And on the flip side of all that affection, he gets profoundly annoyed by people.
Oh, absolutely.
My favorite part of this whole correspondence is when Fronto writes to Marcus to actively scold him for being disagreeable. Fronto literally calls him out for having a solemn look in society and for rudely reading books during banquets or at the theater instead of, making small talk.
He is an extreme introvert,
Oh,
and he's forced into the most extroverted, hyper-public role on the planet. I mean, he is easily drained by social obligations. He hates the noisy law courts, and he really just wants to retreat into his library.
But wait, this completely flies in the face of Stoic apatheia, right? That freedom from passion. This guy sounds incredibly passionate, easily annoyed, deeply affectionate, and just physically miserable.
Yeah.
He doesn't sound like a Stoic master at all.
Well, what's fascinating here is that this intense discomfort is exactly the point. Marcus wasn't born detached. He was a deeply sensitive, anxious man who felt every single burden placed upon him.
Right.
He was forced by circumstance to rule the largest empire on earth, and the sheer friction between his natural disposition and his imperial duties was just tearing him apart.
So this chronic physical pain and this social exhaustion, that's exactly why he dreaded the mornings. That frail, sniveling man we saw in the Fronto letters, that is the exact same man we see fighting his snooze button in Meditations.
And that bridges perfectly to why meditations exist in the first place. Because he felt things so intensely, he needed a cognitive tool to survive his own life.
Wow.
He didn't write meditations for public consumption or, to outline a philosophical treatise for students. He wrote it as a mental technology just to function day to day.
Which completely reframes the entire book. It's not a trophy of his enlightenment, it's a lifeline. And you see the mechanics of that lifeline most clearly in his morning struggle. I mean, there's an entry where he is literally arguing with himself about getting out from under the covers.
You see this play out so powerfully in his internal dialogue. He tells himself, and I'm quoting here, "In the morning when thou findest thyself unwilling to rise, consider with thyself presently, it is to go about a man's work that I am stirred up." He has to brutally badger his own brain. He says, "Was I made for this? To lay me down and make much of myself in a warm bed?"
Here's where it gets really interesting to me. This isn't abstract philosophy at all. This is cognitive behavioral therapy for an emperor.
It really is.
He's having the exact same 5 more minutes argument with himself that we all have on a Monday morning. His brain is saying, but this is pleasing, and he counters it by mechanically forcing a wider perspective. He asks himself, were you born to enjoy pleasure or to act?
It's Jesus' real-time cognitive reframing. He is intercepting a natural biological impulse, which is just exhaustion and a desire for comfort, and he is manually overriding it with a philosophical imperative.
Yeah.
And we see him apply this exact same mental technology to his social exhaustion. Remember, this is the man Fronto scolded for being cranky at dinner parties.
The reading at the banquets, yeah.
Exactly. To survive a day of court politics, he utilizes a specific cognitive exercise every single morning. He tells himself to expect to meet an idle, curious man with an unthankful man, a railer, a crafty, false, or an envious man.
He's literally mentally prepping for the haters.
He is.
He's intentionally visualizing the most annoying, terrible people he's going to encounter that day.
Because he is using a technique designed to prevent his amygdala from hijacking his reason. By anticipating the friction, he removes the element of surprise.
Oh, that makes sense.
Right. So when the unthankful man inevitably shows up, Marcus isn't shocked into anger. He expects it. He then forces his brain to remember that this annoying person is a kinsman, not by blood, but by a shared divine reason.
He actively reminds himself that the best kind of revenge is not to become like unto them, which is such a massive tell. If he were naturally forgiving, he wouldn't need to write this down repeatedly.
Precisely.
He writes it because his immediate visceral instinct is to lash out and just crush the person annoying him.
He is coaching himself out of his own natural irritation. It is a mechanical process of distancing himself from his immediate emotional reflex.
Okay, I buy that this works for a headache or, a sycophant at a banquet. But there's one thing to manage your temper when you're just a guy at a party. What happens when you have the absolute power of life and death over the person who is annoying you?
Right.
I mean, you don't have to tolerate the railer or the false man. You can just have the Praetorian Guard execute them.
And the stakes are infinitely higher there, and Marcus was acutely, terrifiedly aware of that danger. He knew that without a rigorous internal architecture, absolute power would turn him into a monster.
Yeah.
He explicitly warns himself in the diary, "Take heed, lest of a philosopher thou become a mere Caesar in time and receive a new tincture from the court."
He's looking back at tyrants like Phalaris and Nero, recognizing that he shares their exact same unlimited power. Without extreme self-restraint, there's absolutely nothing stopping him from becoming them.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, we have to recognize the moral vacuum of imperial Rome at this time.
What do you mean?
Well, unlike the transactional pagan cults of his peers, where you just sacrifice a bull to Jupiter in exchange for a military victory, Marcus had to build moral guardrails using Stoic physics.
Oh, because the religion didn't provide it.
Exactly. Look at his co-emperor, Lucius Verus. Verus was sent east to handle a massive war, and he essentially left the fighting to his generals while plunging himself into endless drunkenness and debauchery in Antioch.
That was the default setting. I mean, if you give a human being unlimited money, zero accountability, and absolute authority, they generally don't choose to sleep on a cot in a freezing military tent and write about virtue.
Exactly. Marcus had no external accountability, so he had to engineer an internal one. To fight his own ego, he utilized another specific cognitive mechanism, which we call the view from above.
Okay.
He forces his mind to zoom out, to view human affairs from a cosmic perspective. He repeatedly writes that fame is just the clattering of tongues. He explicitly reminds himself that Alexander the Great and his mule driver both ended up as the exact same dust in the ground.
It is a brutal leveling mechanism. When you visualize the entire cosmos and the infinite span of time, the annoying guy at the banquet, or even your own desire for a gold statue, it literally shrinks in psychological weight. It's cognitive distancing.
It mechanically kills the ego. He constantly reminds himself he is just a tiny, fleeting part of a larger, interconnected universe, a citizen of the supreme city.
But journaling in a tent is easy, you know? I'm struggling to see how this mental architecture holds up when the theories are dragged into the real world. Does this internal technology actually work when someone is actively trying to kill him or take his throne?
It's a great question, and history actually provides a stunning test case for exactly this.
Oh, really?
Yes. Avidius Cassius was one of Marcus's most capable generals. He held immense power as the chief governor of the eastern provinces. Now, during a period when Marcus was severely ill, a rumor swept through the empire that he had died.
Okay.
Cassius immediately seized the moment, rebelled, and declared himself emperor.
Wow. This isn't just a political headache. It's an existential threat. A trusted general with legions at his back turning on you. It threatens Marcus, his family, and the entire stability of the Roman world. I mean, most emperors would have unleashed absolute scorching hell.
And we've seen what happens in Roman history when usurpers rise. It usually ends in mass executions and purges. But Marcus's public response was an exact, real-world application of his private diary.
What did he do?
Instead of raging, he expressed deep grief over the horrors of civil strife. He stood before his troops and actually praised Cassius's qualities, expressing a heartfelt wish that Cassius wouldn't be killed before Marcus had the opportunity to look him in the eye and grant him a free pardon.
That is astonishing. He is applying the exact principle he wrote about, refusing to become like the wrongdoer. He is manually overriding the imperial instinct for vengeance.
And his commitment to this philosophy goes even further. Before Marcus could march his legions to the east, Cassius's own officers realized Marcus was still alive. They panicked, and they assassinated Cassius.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. They severed his head and brought it to Marcus, fully expecting a reward. Marcus indignantly refused to even look at the murderers. He refused to accept the head and wouldn't even admit the assassins into his presence.
He completely refused the trophy. That proves the Stoicism wasn't just a performance for the Senate. It was the actual operating system dictating his real-world actions during a massive crisis.
It really was.
But, you know, betrayal is an action taken by a human you can pardon. What about the things he couldn't control? The sources highlight that he lost his beloved wife Faustina, and several of those children he gossiped about on his bed. Only one son survived him.
The sheer volume of grief he carried must have been staggering. And this is where we see his mental technology doing its heaviest lifting.
How so?
He aggressively combats the terror of death by mechanically stripping it of its emotional narrative. He writes that death is just a necessary change of nature, a simple resolution of biological elements. He uses this beautiful metaphor, saying death is no different than a ripe olive falling should praise the ground that bare her and give thanks to the tree that begat her.
But I have to ask, is this just a fancy way of repressing his grief? Like, is he just bottling up the trauma and pretending it doesn't hurt that his children are dying? Or is this mechanism actually reframing the grief so it doesn't psychologically destroy him?
It's a crucial distinction. And the mechanics of his philosophy show it's absolutely the latter. He isn't unfeeling. The fronto letters prove he feels devastating affection and worry.
Right, the Sparakin.
Yes. But he is actively choosing to view loss through the lens of universal nature. He uses a rather graphic analogy to manage this. He tells himself not to act like a pig kicking and squealing at the butcher.
That is violent, but it perfectly illustrates the concept. You can't stop the butcher. The knife is coming regardless. Kicking doesn't save you. It only exhausts you and adds panic to the pain. He is training his mind to stop kicking.
He is mechanically separating the objective event, which is the biological death of a loved one, from the subjective judgment that this is an unfair tragedy that shouldn't have happened.
I see.
He writes, "To suffer change can be no hurt." He reminds himself that everything, his family, his empire, his own life, is just a breath of air drawn in and breathed out. By zooming out to that cosmic perspective, he shrinks his personal tragedy down to a size his mind can actually carry without breaking. He refuses to add the suffering of resistance to the unavoidable pain of loss.
So what does this all mean for how we understand this man? When we synthesize the fronto letters with Meditations, the thesis we started with is completely confirmed. Meditations does not show us what Marcus Aurelius was. It is a real-time record of what he was constantly, desperately trying to become.
The true value of the text isn't that it was written by a flawless, unshakable God who effortlessly floated above human suffering. I mean, if he were a marble statue, his writings would be completely useless to us.
Its immense value is the uncomfortable evidence of his contradictions. It's the fact that the most powerful man on the planet had to fight his own ego, his deep grief, his burning anger, and his desire to hide under the covers every single day. He didn't just have virtue, he had to aggressively coach himself into being a decent human being.
This raises an important question, though, and it is one that complicates his legacy.
What's that?
Well, Marcus spent his entire life building this magnificent internal architecture to ensure he didn't become a tyrant or pass his trauma onto the empire.
Right.
He spent hours in his tent perfecting his own soul. Yet his sole surviving son, Commodus, inherited the throne and almost immediately became one of Rome's most unhinged, brutal, and destructive tyrants. It leaves you wondering, did Marcus's extreme obsession with conquering his own internal flaws cause him to completely miss the monster growing up in his own dining room?
That is a haunting thought. If you spend all your energy gazing inward, fighting a war inside your own mind, you might just lose the war happening in your own house. Next time you're standing in a museum looking at one of those perfect, cold marble busts of a Roman emperor, remember the messy, sniveling, grieving, exhausted man inside? Marble is a lie. The sticky notes he left behind, the daily, grueling choice to get out of a warm bed and try to be good anyway, that is the truth.